the countries that have no semblance of any protection of rights, Iran, Russia, China, North Korea. I mean, there's a bunch of them, right? So there are, in this context, good guys and bad guys, and morally good countries, those that protect protect rights even though they're flawed, and those who have no semblance of that protection, and that makes them evil.
That's really interesting that you point that out on almost a psychological level, because if the anarchist premise is all statism is equally bad, then the worst actors that manifest that in the form of a North Korea or whatever, it doesn't offend them as much as the existence of a state that they may have to concede is better at protecting individual rights, that there's varying degrees here because they almost will not criticize the true representations of what they deem statism to be.
And it's not so much psychological as it is ethical, right? Mm-hmm. And one thing they won't do is say this country's good, this country's evil. They don't want to make that. I mean, they're all subjectivists. Mm-hmm. It's whatever they feel like, and that's important. We strive for moral objectivity. That is, we have a standard of morality, human life, and you evaluate what is morally good versus what is morally bad by the standard of individual human life.
Mm-hmm. Now, Elon, if you could continue along the lines on how that manifests in the terms of foreign policy. So the libertarian is not maybe isolationist, but it's surrenderist, or it doesn't believe in states at all. But as it pertains to the individual right to self-defense, how does that extend to the state's right to defend its citizens in the form of foreign policy that does intervene at times?
For sure. It's an extension of the same principle. So as individuals, we have a moral right to live, and we have a moral right to defend ourselves in extreme emergency situations. In a rational society where our individual rights are protected, what that means is that we've delegated that moral right to an agency, the government, that takes up a monopoly on the use of force. And we do that because that creates the opportunity for the objective rule of law implementation of that right. Mm-hmm. And we need that because we certainly don't want an anarchy. We don't want competing governments. And so that is a crucial role of the government. It's a moral responsibility to protect our individual rights. So that we understand, we have a police, we have a law system. All of that is the expression of our right to life and our, therefore, liberty and our right to defend ourselves. The role of government with respect to foreign threats is really just taking that and extending it to different sources of threat. So if it's a threat for someone to break into my house and steal my property or to harm me, and the government's right to step in, which it is, it's similar in kind to a foreign country tries to attack us, harm us, take our property, take our land. And that's the same role of government. So it's still the protection of individual rights, but with respect to foreign threats. And there's a lot to do to think about what is a foreign threat? How do you relate to other countries? And as Yaron was pointing out, it's not the case that every country in the world is a perfect embodiment of a free society. Many countries are mostly free. Some of them are partly free. Some of them are not free, and they're not trying to be free. And there's dictatorships, and you have to think about that. I would isolate one thing from what Yaron said and really emphasize it, because you're asking for points of contrast between objectivism and libertarianism on this kind of issue, political and foreign policy. Yaron was pointing out that the difference is essentially moral or ethical. I would emphasize that very strongly. I think this is an essential difference. Objectivism strives for identifying, based on the facts, what is morally right, morally wrong, what is a good society, what is a bad society. And here, the standard, the benchmark, or the yardstick maybe is a better term, is how well does a country uphold individual rights? And as Yaron was saying, many countries are mixed, and I think Israel and the United States are basically free, and there's problems with them. And a big part of my job, big part of Yaron's work is to criticize good countries for failing to be fully free and fully good. However, there is a night and day moral difference between a country that is trying to live up to a moral ideal it's the right moral ideal, and countries, and there are many of them, that are not even trying, that their whole purpose for being is to subjugate people, to crush them, to enslave them. And that's what Iran is. That's what Russia is. That's what China is. That is what North Korea is. And there are many, many others in the Middle East that are like that. And that identification, that reality, is part of what has to shape one's moral thinking in foreign policy. So the other way to put Yaron's point about the difference in moral, the role of morality in foreign policy and how it shapes our view, and by contrast, what's missing in libertarian and other schools of thought too, is that is a crucial way of thinking about what foreign policy is about. And there's a huge responsibility for anyone formulating foreign policy, implementing foreign policies, to think, what are we dealing with here? So it can't be true let's just take one example. Let me make up an example. Well, maybe you'll recognize this. Suppose you think that Putin's Russia is a fascist dictatorial regime, which I think it is. It's moving more and more towards that dictatorial path. That is real. That you have to recognize that fact. It's a bad place. It has militant ambitions. We've seen that in Ukraine. We've seen that in other places. You can't ignore that fact if you're taking seriously the responsibility of upholding individual rights in foreign policy. But what happens if you say, oh, no, Putin's a great guy and Russia's our friend and we want to be friendly with them? What does that do? So there's consequences. I hope you recognize what I'm referring to.
And we get along very well.
Yeah, exactly.
We get along so well.
And again, this is a very significant issue. So ignoring the moral character of other countries, or not even trying to figure that out, is a liability, and worse than a liability in many cases. And I think if you want to tie this to Iran, which I know is the topic of our, the history of America's reactions to Iran, history of American policy, if you want to call it policy towards Iran, is we don't think about the moral character. We evade it, or we whitewash it. And that is one reason we are in this horrendous situation with Iran on the brink, apparently within weeks of getting a nuclear device. I don't know exactly where they were, but it was close enough.